Today, we're looking at Psalm chapter 7, and I want to preface this by just bringing to your awareness that David is dealing with many problems. He's dealing with enemies. It almost seems like throughout his life he's dealing in one battle or another. And that's kind of true about life, isn't it? I mean, we have all kinds of battles to fight. We're in one struggle or another. It may be domestic. It may be that some who are listening today have a lot of domestic conflict. We're well aware of the fact that there's abusive relationships in so many homes today in America. Not only that, but even simply speaking, a lot of struggles even keeping the marriage together. That maybe you decided that you weren't just going to walk out after an argument or discontentment, but you may have been in that battle for years. And we're well aware of the fact today that we're dealing with a lot of health issues and many that are very serious, and you may be struggling in that kind of a battle. And we could go on financial hardship, stuck in a dead end job, hard to make ends meet. And so I'm suggesting to you as we look at this psalm in which David is praying to the Lord about the conflict that he's in, the struggle, the battles in life. And it's important, as we've already noticed, that the Psalms are a great study about personal prayer, about going to God and casting your cares upon Him. He cares for you, that you can go to the throne of grace at any time and receive grace or help just to make it from one day to the next and be able to bear those burdens. So we're looking at Psalm chapter 7 today. And David is in conflict. It's a violent conflict. He's in such a battle now that it's simply a matter of life and death. And so I don't know if you've been ever in that kind of a conflict, but I want you to understand that this is just a very sober, somber, violent situation. So, reading from Psalm chapter 7 for just a moment today, David begins, "O Lord my God." I wish I had time just to look at that phrase. In many of our songs, we have that phrase about God is just not our Lord, but He's my God. And it's important to have that kind of relationship to Him. Now, "O Lord my God, in thee do I trust," King James Thee. But what's interesting here, just in the very beginning of this phrase, it's emphatic. It's what he's really saying. If we were listening to his voice, he's saying, "In you I trust." It's emphatic, and he's emphasizing that it's in God that he trusts. Now, I know that we toss this word around a lot, but I think it's important to keep this in mind that God is a God in whom we can trust. He's faithful, and we can take confidence in Him. But literally, what he's saying in the Hebrew, that God is my refuge. Since God is my refuge and my shelter, then I can take safety in Him. And of course, that's undergirded by my trust. Having a place of safety that you can go to, that you can trust, you can be confident in, that you can be confident that you're not in danger from your enemies, or that God will provide a way. And so that's a very important thing in life, because what you're going to see here in a moment, the place of trust is not in men. Boy, we could just run with this. We put our trust in so many things that are not very trustworthy, whether we're talking about money or relationships. Our trust oftentimes fails. But what it's important to think about this, that in God I really can put my trust. He's my refuge, and He is a place of safety. Now, notice this, from all men. Now, we're going to see as he develops the thought that there's such a great number of enemies here. You just have to wonder, don't you? I believe that so oftentimes, we're either entering into a battle, we're in the middle of one, or coming out, or we're just about ready to go to the next one. Trouble on every side, and having so many enemies, and it looks like from the phrase that they've all assembled against him. One enemy's quite enough, but think about having a bunch of enemies. Then he goes on to say, who persecute me and deliver me. Now, the reason I said it's violent is because what you're going to see, and down in verse 5, he'll talk about the pursuit. That is, the enemies are pursuing him. But here, what he's talking about, they're so violent. They're like a lion that's ready to rip him to shreds. And that's why he says, lest he fear my soul like a lion, rendering it into pieces. And literally, it's referring to broken pieces. In other words, what he's saying in this verse, now listen very carefully. If you do not deliver me from my enemies, they'll tear me to pieces. They're like wild beasts. They're mean and ugly. They're cruel. It's amazing, isn't it, today, that there are so many violent people who look at life as almost worthless, and they're willing to do such abominable things that they don't value life. And here he's talking about he has the enemies that are as fierce as lions, and that they'll kill him. And he's saying, God, if you don't deliver me, I have no hope. And so he's trusting in God as the one who can deliver him from those fierce enemies. Just let me slow down just a little bit. Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing, instead of being anxious and looking for help elsewhere? That doesn't mean we ought not to look for help. God may open up some of those doors where you can get help. But fundamentally, think about going through life trusting in God in such a way that in spite of the circumstances and being surrounded by enemies, whether you're in the home or in your workplace or where you're dealing with it, that you can go to God and have that kind of confidence in him. And so what he's saying here, if you don't deliver me, Lord, I'm not getting out of this. My hope is in thee, and my trust is in thee. And that's what he's praying to God like that. Think about just praying to God like that. When you speak to God and saying to God, you are my only hope. By the way, this is what the Bible stresses, especially in our spiritual battles, and in those we're always struggling, I think, sometimes. And yet, the Bible says in Acts 4:12 that there's no other name given among men under heaven whereby we can be saved. I mean, only Jesus can do that. Think about it. Only Jesus can save you. That's where you put your trust and your hope. That's why Jesus said, no man cometh unto the Father except by me. You need to put your trust in Jesus. And I think there's a lot of folks that haven't got that yet. I mean, they struggle with that your only way out and your only way into heaven is that it's going to be through the Lord. But just talking about life, we just need to be thinking about this very simple yet very significant and important point, that God is our refuge. And when we kind of understand that, then we can put our trust in him. Do you speak to God like that? Number 3, I believe. Oh Lord my God, if I have done this, there is equity in my hands. I'm going to read the next 2 or 3 verses here, but what David is doing here, it's sort of an image of going before the judge, and David is presenting his case before the righteous judge, and David's righteous judge is God himself. Now, when we think about going before a judge, usually that's thought about in negative terms, and what David is going to do is proclaim his innocence, and since God is a righteous judge, he'll render the verdict of not guilty, that David is innocent. Now, you know, and I know as a matter of fact, that even innocent men are that go through the courts today, they may be standing before a corrupt judge, or the evidence may be spurious, it may be false, and even though the man is innocent, they render the wrong verdict. But what David is doing, these enemies who are accusing him and who are pursuing him, he's saying that when he stands before God, that he's innocent, and he's counting on judge to render the righteous judgment. And by the way, the only way that can happen is if you're in the Lord. Now, let me go ahead and read this. If I've done anything wrong, if there's any evil in my hand, if I have done something without cause to my enemy, if I've stole from him or robbed him or lied to him or done evil to him. And by the way, the background may be David being pursued by Saul, and David never did anything to Saul. If Saul had any sense at all, David was his ally. And yet, because of Saul's jealousy and suspicion and wickedness in his heart, he pursued David with the intent of killing him. And this might be just the background here that David had never done anything wrong. And though he's being pursued by those thousands of soldiers of Saul, David is saying, I'm innocent, and God knows I'm innocent. And in the end, Saul will say, Saul, doggone it. Shoot. Oh, I'm back. I got interrupted. I hope you're still with me. Well, I'm not sure where we're at, but anyhow, let's go ahead and finish this. David is simply saying, I'm innocent. And if the enemy pursue, verse number 5, my soul, take it and let it read down my life, the earth. In other words, let them conquer me, let them destroy me, let them trample me in the dust. But the fact is that David is innocent, and God will vindicate that. And I'll tell you what, God will vindicate that eventually, ultimately, in an eternal sense. He'll vindicate you because of his righteousness, because of your relationship with Christ. Now, that's what we're really interested in, I think, and so oftentimes, is that we're standing in the right relationship with God, and that can only happen in God. Now, we got interrupted, and our thoughts have been a little bit digressed, but we'll make sure that doesn't happen again. Now, tonight, we're going to be looking at Psalm 8, one of the truly wonderful, great Psalms in the entire book. And so I hope you'll be back with me tonight. Now, I'll just say this, because I'm not going to take time to exegete the rest of the verse or chapter. But what David is going to deal with is the fate of the wicked. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday. And if I had more time today, I'd talk about people need to learn, and they need to learn this. They need to really learn this, that there are consequences of doing evil, and they're not good. So David will deal how God will deal with the righteous and how God will deal with the unrighteous, and we need to keep that in mind. And so I hope you stayed with me through the interruption, and we'll see you tonight, 7 o'clock.